Welcome to the Startup Grind.
What gets you going in the mornings?
You know, watching snow reports in the winter, and watching kayak and tide charts in the summer. Big kayaker, big skier, and being in the Northwest, you really want to be taking advantage of both of those opportunities. And so, definitely a big outdoors person, and that makes a big difference. Love waking up to 6:30.
Yeah, exactly. Snow on the ground.
Snow on the ground, and get up early and watch out what's happening on the East Coast. It's nice being kind of 3 hours earlier, than the rest of the East Coast. So definitely pay attention to what's happened in New York and understand what's happened there. And they provide a little summary of what happened in Europe and what happened in Asia the day before. And so all those things matter.
Let's talk about that. So you're from New York.
I'm from Puerto Rico, but raised in New York City. Yeah. Exactly right.
So tell us a fun story about growing up in New York. And how long did you live there? When did you leave New York?
I left New York to go to college in upstate New York.
Sure.
So went to RPI in upstate New York, and lived in Rochester, New York as well with Xerox Corporation, and moved out of New York in 1985 to move to Palo Alto, California.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so it was in New York. And New York, great place to be. I think, the experiences you build there are just extraordinary. I think there's this Kurt Vonnegut rumored talk that he gave, to the graduating class at MIT that talked about everyone living in New York but leaving after 7 years before you get too hard, and everybody needing to live in San Francisco but leaving before you get too soft. I happen to have lived 7 years in both and feel fairly well-rounded and very happy to now be in Seattle.
There you go. That's well put. So 7 years and 7 years. So you experienced both coasts.
Yes,
yeah, that's
absolutely.
Great. And why'd you pick Palo Alto? Did it pick you, or did you pick it?
Yeah, I was fortunate. I started working with the Xerox Corporation out of college in Rochester, New York. I was in the team that led the introduction of CAD/CAM systems, computer design systems, into Xerox in the early 80s, helping designers that had designed with vellum and pencil how to use this thing called interactive graphics on Intergraph CAD systems for how to design using computers. And that work, we spent about $500 million in the 80s, which is a significant amount of capital to essentially retool the entire corporation globally, California, Europe, Fuji Xerox. And at the end of the day, we found that it still took 5 to 7 years to design a printer or a copier. And so the interventions and the value we were looking to get out of our systems deployment hadn't actually been realized. And so an opportunity opened up at the Palo Alto Research Center to understand the business and the process of design from a different perspective. If we were using CAD/CAM as a way of capturing the artifacts, the printers and copiers we were designing, perhaps there was an opportunity to look at design as a different process, as a different activity. Yeah. And so in 1985, we were looking at design as a social activity. And so if you're going to document social activities, what tools do you use? And we were busy using local area video networks, desktop video conferencing systems, really capturing the conversations that take place prior to design activity, prior to actually marking things on paper and tying those things together. So when you have a question about why a photoreceptor is where it is, or why a paper handling system is where it is, we were using audio and video records in 1985 on 12-inch laser displayers over 56 kilobit networks to link designers together that were physically separated from each other. And so it was in service of understanding this CAD/CAM question that I moved from product land to 7 years of research at PARC.
Yeah. See, so being at PARC is it's no small thing. What were one of the takeaways that you got out of that experience? I mean, because that's a great experience.
It was. I mean, it was a really formative and life-changing experience for me in a couple of ways. One was, I walked into an office in a lab. It's called the Smalltalk Lab. I joined the lab that was run by Adele Goldberg. Adele is famous for having given Steve Jobs the demo that gave him the idea for the Lisa, which turned into the Macintosh. And there was a gentleman whose office I took who left in a hurry. He left paper everywhere. He went off to design something called a silicon engine. Some guy named Jim Clark, who ultimately created Netscape.
He didn't do much.
Yeah, exactly. Didn't do an awful lot of things. But what was interesting to me is that amidst all of this technology and 200 researchers, there was also a small group of 7 anthropologists. And the idea of anthropologists in a research center really threw me for a loop, and really trying to understand why they were there. And the purpose of why they were there was really intended to understand the user interface of photocopiers in the early 80s. And the issue is, as copiers got more sophisticated and more capable, you could print on both sides of the page. You could put a staple on the page. You could collate them in different ways. You could actually think about processing documents in different ways. The user interface didn't adapt to that, and it actually stayed pretty complicated. And so the idea of the anthropologist was to actually videotape workers using copiers and trying to understand the gap that existed between what they were trying to accomplish and and how they could do that with the user interface and the copiers. And through that process, they began to understand intent. They began to understand the notion of user-centered modeling, and the interface for the copier began to change, and then they became usable and available to others. Well, we didn't really stop there, and so we began to rely on the anthropologists to help us understand the role of technology and its use in a broader context. And even though I was a computer scientist, I really began to understand that we build technology. There are people that use technology, but the thing that matters the most is the boundary between technology and its use. And so since then, I've been very focused, still interested in technology and new capabilities, but most interested in understanding the impact implications of technology. And so that notion, going back to anthropologists, was really key to build that appreciation in a techno-macho world, as John Seeley Brown is so fond of saying.
Yeah. So you're a product guy at heart.
I am a technology guy at heart.
Yeah.
Technology and use.
Yeah,
exactly
you want
right.
to see how it's used. You want to make sure it's actually useful.
Well, I want to understand how it's used. Exactly, because technology for technology's sake is not interesting. It's about building things that actually make a difference and make impact. Yeah. And I think for a long time I felt that the Bronze Age, the Industrial Age, all of those ages are characterized by people putting in a little bit of input and getting a lot of value on the other end of the equation. But if you talk to anyone that needs to check their cell phone and their email and their car and their smartphone and voicemail and recharge devices, and we think about the amount of input we're putting into our technology as a function of the amount of value that we're getting out, it doesn't seem that we've quite yet hit that equation where the machines and technology is doing more for us than we're actually putting in. Yeah. And as long as that's the case, there's lots of opportunity for many of us in the technology industry to continue to be innovating.
Yeah, yeah. Well put. Yeah, well put. So tell me a little bit about growing up. What did your parents do? What did they do when you were 5, 8 years, 10 years old? Yeah, my father was in the military, Korean War, and when he came back from the Korean War, started doing data processing in Puerto Rico. So it was line printers, data processing. When we moved to New York in 1969, he joined IBM. And he joined IBM on 42nd Street and 3rd Avenue as a part of the World Trade Corporation. So I remember going to visit him at IBM on 42nd Street and had a chance to visit the Watson Research Center in Yorktown Heights, New York, and I am fairly certain that I'm the only person to ever bounce a basketball at Yorktown Heights Research Center coming out of middle school. They were inventing something called the Joseph subjunction for ECL logic, and I hit one of the stands and really kind of torqued a laser they were using there. But it was pretty, it was a great experience in the sense of understanding kind of early exposure to technology in that process. And my mother was an executive assistant, working actually as the executive assistant for the principal at my elementary school. Well, that's always nice to have your mom to work. Yeah, especially being the assistant of the principal puts an inordinate amount of additional social pressure on a young aspiring 4th grader. Yes. So tell me, what was your first job that you got paid from someone that wasn't your relative? That's an interesting, got paid from someone that wasn't my relative. So what was the first paying job that you had that wasn't a relatively paying you money? Yeah, I mean, at 12 years old, I worked at a daycare center actually taking care of 5th graders, of 5-year-olds. So you were 12-year-old? I was 12 years old. Taking care of a 5-year-old? Taking care of a 5-year-old. Exactly right. I worked a summer. I remember getting that first check. It was $100 for 2 weeks' work. And yeah, it was extraordinary. Went to see a movie. Yeah, it was. You were loaded. I was. Oh, absolutely. That was incredible. So that was the first time, and I remember that really well. Yeah, I was the same. I painted a fence. I remember painting fences for a kid, like 8 years old, painting fences. Yeah. Getting like $0.25 an hour. No, exactly right. Yeah. What books have you read in the last year that you really stands out? Are you a book reader? Or are you a, what?
I am. Yeah. No, I do. I mean, my wife is a librarian.
Yeah.
My aunt is a librarian. My aunt's best friend is a
librarian. Books in your family.
Books are big. Books are big in the family. And I try, because I spend so much time staying current on technology. I mean, with the pace of technology, I really end up needing to read an awful lot of technical journals. And so when I'm actually reading a physical book, that book is elsewhere. So I really try and separate myself as much as I possibly can.
Yeah.
So I'm finishing up my Hunger Games trilogy that I can go dive in and go catch the second movie. And it's extraordinary books. I'm really enjoying them.
Yeah, that is coming out soon, right?
Yeah, it's out actually as of last Friday. I think they grossed $178 million over the weekend.
Wow, that's franchising. Now, what about your college? Did you pick RPI, or did it pick you?
Yeah.
It's a very technical place to go. So
it is, actually. So a couple of things. One is I knew that I wanted to be in technology. And actually, initially, I went to college to study electrical engineering. And so I applied to a variety of different schools. And that story is an interesting one in itself. I went to school in the Bronx, New York, and I remember, and I alternated between public schools and private schools. So I went to private school in Puerto Rico until 3rd grade. I went to public school in the South Bronx of New York City for 4th through 6th grade, the first bilingual school in the United States. And then I went to the United Nations Middle School with the kids of all the delegates of the UN for 7th and 8th grade, very private school. Yeah. And then I went to a very Jewish public school in the Bronx, in upstate New York, and still in the Bronx, New York. And I remember that first day of school, first class, social studies teacher asked, somebody tell me the definition of the word stereotype. I remember a gentleman got up on the second row, second column, 4th row, got up and said, a stereotype, a typewriter with speakers. And I remember I was looking at a document, I'm in the 9th grade, and I slowly looked up and I said, yep, no, I did just hear that. I really did just hear that. It's like, oh my God, I am out of here as quickly as I possibly can. And so, I finished high school in 3 years, actually. I was 16, and I applied to all of my universities under early admission. Sure. And got into a couple of places. RPI was interesting because it was 3 hours away from New York City. My cousin had gone to school there for a civil engineering job, or schooling, was doing his master's. So I had a sense of what RPI was about, but I also had a full scholarship to attend there. And some of the other schools weren't as generous, and I needed the scholarship in order to attend. And so, and RPI was a great place to be, and so I did. I went to RPI, started off as a EE major. I was fortunate to work on the communication systems for what's now called the Voyager mission. So the spaceship that's now in the Helios. I helped design the graphics engine to model the communications engine for systems for that spaceship. And doing that work gave me an introduction into computer graphics. And I said, boy, this EE is interesting, but this computer science graphic stuff is really cool. Yeah. And so I switched majors from EE to computer science.
So did you have anything to do with the Voyager Capital?
It actually didn't, ironically, no. That name completely independent. It did, yeah. Okay. One of my partner's sons was big into Star Trek, as was my wife, and that name came into the fax machine the same day, and we went with it.
That's great. So yes, let's talk a bit about Voyager. Yes. You started Voyager 95?
96.
96, yeah.
Yes.
So it started in 96. Did tons and tons and tons of investments. I mean, you guys are still one of the leading VC firms in the area. What was the exit? Why'd you leave?
Well, venture capital has been interesting for me. I spent 15 years in research and development at Xerox, at Adobe, at Gartner. And then had an opportunity, along with my 2 partners, to start Voyager Capital. Really a great opportunity. Our idea was, there are no venture capital firms in Seattle that focus exclusively on early stage information technology investment opportunities. And we felt that just wasn't, that was an underserved opportunity. Having been in the Valley, having seen what's happened there, having been in this ecosystem, we believed that this region was going to blossom into a very strong and dominant center. I mean, at the time when we raised our first fund, total revenues of all tech companies in the state of Washington was $8 billion. By the time we raised our second fund, it was $20 billion. By the time we raised our third fund, it was $160 billion.
Yeah.
Right, and so the growth rate associated, with the region is something that we saw early on, and felt that we could provide a IT early stage investment fund in the region. And that worked incredibly well. So 97, we raised our first fund. That was almost a $50 million fund. From 97 to 2000, you could do no wrong. This is Internet 1.0, where we are literally, think 1848, Sacramento, California. You're selling, gold pans and hoses and saddles for horses. We were selling internet in a box and early stage routers and 56K modems. And okay, let's get away from the PC. Everything is online. It's Netscape. And so, we invested 13 companies. Our biggest exit there, I was fortunate to be an investor in Aquantive. We had 6 exits, 13 companies. It was, lefty. We were just doing an incredible job. So it's a great time. 2000, 2001, internet bust.
Sure. We
go into a down cycle economically that affects just our industry. It's just a dot-com bust. And that is, we reach a saturation level in the market. Internet 1.0 phenomena was largely a domestic opportunity. There wasn't the same level of scalability of access to computing or infrastructure in other parts of the world. And so, it didn't have the capacity that it has now to absorb the level of technology. And so you had the market that was pretty saturated in terms of absorption of capability. 2002, 2006, we could have cured cancer, it wouldn't have mattered. It was just a very, very tough situation. But coming out of 05, 06, we once again got into the next level of internet wave. And now we began to be able to level the field quite a bit. We got to about 2009, and a data point caught my attention. And the data point was this. From 2001 to 2011 or so, the growth of technology and the success of internet and computer-based companies was extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. In 2000, 2001, you have Salesforce.com as a new innovative business model. You have the whole cloud computing phenomena that starts with iTunes and starts with the iPod and just continues to explode. You've got Google coming on strong. You've got a whole host of consumer-based businesses. You've got some trickling in the technology sector for business, but nothing meaningful. But having said that, it is a skyrocket, just a rocket ship in terms of the amount of companies that are built during that period of time. But when I looked at the data for venture capital as an industry, it was an interesting observation, and that is from 2001 to 2011, the net internal rate of return for all of venture capital as an industry was 1.1%.
Yeah, I was going to say it's negative, but 1.1.
It's positive.
Barely.
Your Sealy mattress beat it on an inflation-adjusted basis.
Exactly.
And so it just didn't make any sense. It's like, wait a minute, how can it be that in one of the most prosperous periods in the history of innovation of our industry, that the professionals that are charged with helping to enable that reality have fared so poorly? So being kind of an engineering analytical type, I stepped back and paused and really said, well, let me apply the business of business process re-engineering to the business of venture capital. What's changed? What's really affected this? And that exercise took about 1.5 years of reflection, and everything changed. Everything changed. When Bill Draper Sr. in the 40s has generated some wealth, and an entrepreneur comes to visit with him and says, I have this idea for a business. And Bill says, come over to the house on Saturday. Let's talk about it. Comes over to the house. It's an interesting idea, but let me get you to go talk to Sally because she's really good at X. And let me get you to go talk to John because he's really good at Y. What do you need? You need $500? Here. It's a big, here, take $500. A lot of money back then. But let's go do that. What, you want me to be on your board? Okay, let's be on your board. Right? And this whole process of engagement and working with entrepreneurs, is fairly successful. That first company was the heart defibrillator. All right? It's like, hey, this thing kind of works. The idea that you can invest in money in companies that haven't really started yet. And he did it again. And he raised like a $2 million fund and a $5 million fund. New York Times, look at this. Money being invested on companies that don't exist. It's like, why would you do that? It's like, no, this is about feeding the system of entrepreneurship and understanding the cycles of startup generation. And so through that work, it worked. It was really successful. And a $5 million fund turned into a $50 million fund, turned into a $500 million fund, and in 2000, $105 billion of capital was raised by the industry. And that was not because it was, again, a friends and family kind of round. It was that professional investors are seeking alpha, trying to seek accelerated returns, and they found that this alternative asset category called alternative assets, private equity, venture capital, was actually doing a great job of delivering results. And so more money came into the system. And so venture capital became as much about kind of money management as it did about company formation.
Helping entrepreneurs.
It did. And the value, when we funded Aquana, it was a $35 million round. And, in talking to Brian McAndrews, how much would we raise now? I said, if we needed to raise more than $7 million, it'd be a lot. It's because back then we had to buy our own servers. We were in Exodus. Remember that colo facilities? You had to set up your own network. You had to set up your entire infra. All of that is gone. And so all of the reasons why companies needed a lot of capital have largely been dissipated. Second, in 1996, for every 6 IPOs, there were only 5 M&A transactions. It was in 2001 where it became 1-to-1, where the same number of IPOs and the same number of M&A transactions accounted for exits for startup companies. By 2008, that number was 22-to-1. For every 22 M&A transactions, there's only 1 IPO. And so the business, from an exit perspective for our industry, became about selling, about exiting as a result of selling our companies to other businesses. And there's reasons for that as well. And a big part of that is, as the business of innovation has accelerated, it's gotten harder and harder for bigger businesses to continue innovating. Yeah. And so if they seek to pursue growth strategies, increasingly, the companies that we build are largely an outsourced R&D exercise. So you have this dynamic of less money needed to build companies. You have this dynamic of most of the companies are exiting through acquisition. You have this dynamic of venture as an industry being as much about money management as it is about company formation. And in reflecting on all of those models and looking at my own personal portfolio, I said, well, here are my home runs. Here I got my money back. Here's the column of I lost my t-shirt. And what do they have in common, or what's different between them? And the thing that column 1 had in common was the execution excellence of all of the companies. It didn't matter if it was an Aquana at their level or an 10X or a GMI. They all realized their full potential and were able to maximize the value that they returned back to investors. Yeah. And the reason for that is they all executed incredibly, incredibly well. And so the companies in broke even or lost my t-shirt executed less well. So when reflecting, I said, well, if execution matters so much, then what would it matter to bring additional execution resources to emerging businesses? So I started to do some experiments, even within Voyager. It's like, well, is it possible to identify a critical need in a business and parachute a resource in to help provide additional value adds to augment that shortcoming in that business? And it worked. Yeah. And so what the issues that had been lingering, as a result of bringing additional attention, you were able to bring up the weakest link functionally in an organization and realize an exit. And so it was at that time that I said, there might be a different way of thinking about the notion of venture capital. And in looking around at other industries that have a model similar to this that's execution oriented, the model that I found was private equity firms. A private equity firm like a KKR or a Silver Lake will see a business and say, business person, you've done a great job of bringing the company to this level, but I have a team of 200 operating partners that really know how to take that company to the next level. I said, wow, what I'm really looking for is something that's a blend of venture capital, which is still unproven early stage businesses, but like private equity that has operating partners that can be brought to bear to augment and provide that execution resource that should typically accompany the money that we invest in a company. And I called that venture equity. It's the combination of those two models. And so I really got passionate about the business of pursuing a venture equity model that was maniacally focused on execution. And after 15 years of building a brand that has one model and one set of operating assumptions, you can't turn that ship. And so it's really important to kind of build a new brand and go pursue that vision under a different, as attorneys like to say, a different platform.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be 9 Mile Labs.
So that would be a combination, exactly. Yep. 9 Mile Labs is its most recent incarnation. Exactly right.
Yep. Well, give us a short, 30-second.
Yes.
What's 9 Mile Labs?
9 Mile Labs is a business-to-business startup accelerator. Our focus is believing that the business-to-business market segment is underserved and underfunded. There's 3 main users of technology. There's the B2B, business to business, B2C, consumer, B2G, business to government. Our viewpoint is that the last meaningful investment in B2B was made December 31st of 1999. And that was right before the Y2K bell went off. And if you remember 96 to 2000, we spent a lot of money. So CFOs spent a lot of money, or authorized the spending of money by CIOs to not let the companies fail. And they didn't. No planes crashed, no elevators got stuck. Overall, we did fairly well. But come January 1st of 2000, CFOs said, you know, we just spent a lot of money preventing a disaster. Thank you. Having said that, we're not going to spend any more money right now. And so Mark Benioff, trying to develop Salesforce automation, says, wow, that's a problem. How do I get my SFA tool out there? I know. What I'll do is I'll just make an application that salespeople can buy on their credit card. And as a result, they don't have to go to an IT department. And after I get half the salespeople using the software, then I'll go to the CFO and say, hey, you're using it already. Let me actually find a different way of delivering that capability. But in that meantime, all of these consumer resources and services kept building and building and building. Well, at the same time, our business tools haven't changed that much. And proof of that is how many people are still running Microsoft Word version, right? How many people are still running Excel? How many people are still running
Outlook? Even, yeah.
Outlook. Yeah. How many people are still running PowerPoint? Right? I mean, so we have these tools, right? So I call it the 9 to 5 and 5 to 9 conundrum. 9 to 5, the 5 o'clock bell rings, you walk outside the door, you grab your smartphone, boom. Before you get home, you turn on your Nest to set the temperature, right? You change the television channel using your Xfinity remote. You check in with your friends to figure out where they are. You check Facebook to figure out what the family status is. You let your kids know where you are. You order food on Grub. You get a car with a car to go to reserve it, or you use one of the multitude of Uber or some other service. You have this incredibly powerful, rich experience. You go home, you've got a television, you have a second screen on your tablet, you have a third screen on your phone. You are the master of your own domain. You go to sleep, you get up at 7 in the morning, you go to work, it's 9 o'clock, you power your PC and you run Word and Office and Excel. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And so, if we think back to the history of the personal computer, I was one of the first people to bring a PC into my office at Xerox. And people's like, what are you doing with that? I said, I need to run a database program. We're doing an inventory of our CAD systems. On a personal computer? It's like, yeah. And so it was a crossover, and for many of us, it was a crossover from using personal tools, bring your own device to work, and finding business applications for those tools. And that was very much the case that I think that's going to replay itself now. And so we have this whole context of consumerization of the enterprise. There is no way that knowledge workers are going to live with this incredibly fascinating and rich set of tools on their personal life and live with the impoverished tools that they have at work.
Business, yeah.
And you can look at kind of two columns of saying, well, enterprises will fix that. And so you'll have Facebook brought to you by Microsoft, or Facebook brought to you by IBM. Right? Yeah. It's like, there's no way. I mean, do you think that that tool is anything that, the consumerization elements are anything that enterprise companies deeply understand? No. Or go the other way. You have a Twitter, and now Twitter is tackling the communication needs of a corporation the size of a Boeing. For GE. Exactly right. They're doing everything they possibly can to keep track of their consumer space. Yeah. So you have these silos between the enterprise delivering enterprise tools, you have consumers delivering consumer tools. So what's that middle column that says, oh, this is what it means to have access to these modalities that go from systems of record of past like SAP and Oracle and PeopleSoft that continue to be important, but now we've all become literate in understanding the opportunities for systems of engagement. The fact that the machines that were at one point about phone bills, at a different point about crunching numbers, are actually now tools about supporting human-to-human communication. Yeah. And that now it's about the notion of understanding the relationship between a customer and a supplier and a shareholder and a management team, and that fluidity, which melts organizational structures, now has an opportunity to empower the true content and context of business. And that category is one example of the kinds of opportunities that we see emerging out of the business-to-business focus. And so our focus is maniacally and exclusively on business-to-business companies at a seed stage, which means right at the point where they're about to mitigate technical risk, where they know what's involved in building their product or solution, but now taking our resources to help those companies understand what's involved in matching that to customer validation and customer understanding.
Yeah.
So we have a fairly strong extended team. We ran our first cohort in the summer of this year. It ran from April to September. Good group of companies. 4 of them have raised equity. 4 of them have raised revenue. Turns out the revenue is far less dilutive than equity, and so we're
weird how that works.
Yeah, we're very proud of all of the companies. One company accelerated to a point where they recognized that their vision turned out to be a feature and not a product or a solution. And so they're just in the process now of selling their business to a company that has a solution. And you know, the entrepreneur is grateful, as are we. I mean, for him, we saved him 2 years of exploration into you know, what would have been probably the same outcome. And so that worked out, you know, fairly well. Yeah. So now we are, or at least worked out in an accelerated fashion. We're now starting our second cohort. That'll launch in January of this year, January 15th. We raised a fund, a $900,000 fund, to fund the operations of that accelerator. And so we've now grown a larger extended team. So we have 5 partners, our investors in our fund, a network of 100 mentors, but then importantly, companies that embrace that as well. Because if you go back to the point that most of our exits are through sales to other businesses, it doesn't make sense to start those conversations with your exit partners at the end.
Yeah, you want to do it.
Why not start those conversations now? And so, in fact, our process of vetting our companies, which we started as of last Monday, includes the engagement of our corporate partners to help us decide, hey, we're looking at 2 companies in big data analytics. If you had your druthers, which of these 2 sounds more interesting to you? Because we actually have a choice and are interested in supporting the development of companies that have, you know, large and scalable opportunities. And if your perspective is that this one's a little bit better positioned, we'd like to know that, because that's helpful to us, helpful to the entrepreneurs, and helpful to the entire ecosystem.
Yeah. So it's just like you say, you have that maniacal focus to stay on B2B and don't get moved to the shiny object.
No, exactly. And you know, and we have, you know, in B2B we define it broadly. Our definition of B2B is any company that gets paid by another company. You know,
yeah,
and
so
that's, you know, because we're prepared to be completely shocked and surprised by interesting innovations of the entrepreneurs that come meet with us. Yeah. And last program we had 2 wireless companies, 2 social enterprise companies, 3 internet infrastructure companies. All 9 of them had a cloud component to them, which was interesting. Yeah. It's not because we intentionally sought out those businesses. It's just that that's where, you know, that's where it happened to land.
Yeah. So you over the years have spent countless hours with entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Some good, some bad. So what are some things that you constantly remind entrepreneurs about? Like, I'm talking about in the startup environment. What are some of the things that you just, it's like, you know what, I just talk about this a lot. Give us something that you talk a lot to an entrepreneur about.
Yeah, if we build it, they won't come. Right? It just doesn't. It just doesn't work that way. Right? I think that the understanding of the business problem that you're trying to solve is critical. And that goes back to kind of that Xerox PARC training, if you will. But just in general, you have to be focused on an interesting problem that's a real problem. And you have to be able to understand the problem completely before you're able to then understand the solution that you're trying to bring to that problem. Yeah. And there's so many times where you can get enamored by the technology, and the brightness of the, you know, of the shine on the technology overwhelms your ability to understand the true implications of what you've created and why. Yeah. Which is really unfortunate. Second is startups drown, they don't starve. And so the idea here is that when you're building a new company and a new idea, and it's brand spanking new and you're just creating it, there are probably a number of different applications you can put that technology to. The problem is you don't have the resources, the scale, the opportunity to tackle all of them. And as a result of trying to tackle all of them, you're like a piece of bread in a duck pond. I mean, there's no one duck that swallows you, but each one taking a bite compromises your ability to really galvanize your resources in service of a win. And a service of a win is, I built a product, I found a problem statement. I can sit on a top place and a position that allows me an opportunity to understand what other markets I can go own after having owned the first one. And in order to do that, you have to galvanize your people resources, your financial resources, your technical resources in service of reaching that hill. And once you've done that, you have a win. It gives you credibility. And from that vantage point, you can leverage that success in service of climbing the next hill above. And so ironically, when we meet with entrepreneurs, it's like, I actually want you to do less than believing that I need you to do everything you can possibly do to be successful. And the notion is you have an assumption as the chief experiment officer, which is what CEO really means, to understand what product to what market at what price, ideally profitably. And if your first guess is wrong, cross that out quickly and cheaply and move on to your next guess. And do that serially so that every time you do that, you're learning from your previous example on your path towards homing in on the right formula for being able to solve a problem that people care about in a profitable way.
Yeah, and along those same lines, what excites you about working with an entrepreneur?
Blind disregard for the impossible. I mean, let's think about this. At the point that, think about it, at the point that an idea is born, how many people believe that idea?
Yeah, one. There's only one. 1
out of 7 billion, right? And you are now like a salmon in one of our rivers, swimming upstream against the advent of people telling you, you're crazy, you can't do that, it already exists, no one would care, right? And so that notion
Google can do it.
Google can do it, right? Exactly. Other people can do it. Why do you think you can do it, right? It's like, no, I have the tenacity to believe that that which exists only in my brain is something that should exist in the real world and that people will benefit from it. And so that power and that ability to convey that insight and that passion in a way that convinces the first person, a co-founder, an employee, someone to join you in that crusade is extraordinary. And then the process of progressive refinement and slowly this energy that's inside of your head starts to take a form, and you begin to understand how to explain it. And you begin to understand how to defend it. And you begin to understand how to deliver it. And you begin to tell the story of why it matters. And you begin to understand what resources are required. And people start to believe. And people start to take a chance and start to test it. And then they want to fund you. And then they want to support you. And that magical trip that starts off as an idea in someone's head in a shower somewhere, and the fact that that idea can start and culminate in your standing at NASDAQ pressing a button, right? That journey, that's an extraordinary journey. That's really an extraordinary journey. And so an amazing amount of respect for what's involved in being able to navigate that journey appropriately, and recognizing, the power of serendipity in that. Because there's something, it's not unlike a salmon. When I go here up to Marble Mount, I talked about, and you see those salmon that are red, I just sit there and marvel at them. It's like, okay, so you navigated the seals, you navigated the dams, you navigated the fishermen,
bears.
You navigated the bears, you navigated the orcas, and here you are. You made it back home, you get to mate, then you die, but you made it back home.
Exactly.
And so there's not a big dissimilarity. And so that power of believing that you can change the world is really exceptional. And as I think about Seattle, I think one of the things that we need more of course, is this notion and belief that we can change the world as opposed to change my world. Right? And those are different things. And so the ability to talk to people that believe that they can leave their mark and actually change the world, boy, sign me up for that trip all day long.
Yeah, that's great. And so, talking about some of those experiences, what was one of the experiences you had with an entrepreneur, or just call it a company, it doesn't have to be a person, that in your eyes was dead ringer going to be successful, and was not at all?
It was not at all.
Yeah, well, give us one of the, is there an example you can think of?
Oh, there absolutely,
It's like you knew in your heart this is easy, this is done. And
and there's actually a couple of instances of that, and there's one property that they all have in common, many of them have in common, and that property is timing, is being too early or too late. So I had a colleague, I was an investor in a company where we had this business model right when feature phones were first coming out. And the idea was they had negotiated contracts with taxi providers around the country. And the idea was on a feature phone, you could special codes on the feature phones to the carriers to allow a taxi to show up at your door. And I remember I was in Tacoma when I got the text message from the CEO, and he forwarded to me the press release on Uber raising $400 million 13 years after he had pioneered that business model and concept. He says, "Rats, 13 years too early." and so the number of times where it's typically been too early rather than too late is extraordinary. Too late, it's about competing. Too early, it's about creating a market. And so the role of timing is something that I really respect an amazing amount today, because you can't be too early, you can't be too late. You've got to be at the right place at the right time to be able to deliver a product, because the product actually needs to be bought. You can't be in an incessant mode of selling your product. If you are, then you're doing things unnaturally. And so that notion of timing, of when you have a value proposition that's ready to hit the market.
Explain that just a bit. Talk about it, because you mentioned it can't be bought. I totally get it, but explain that a little bit further so everyone understands when you say can't be bought, what that really means.
And what it means is that, I mean, you have again, so if we start with this idea in someone's head, and you're slowly bringing life to that idea, at the point that someone understands it, they need to be able to understand it, whether as a consumer or as a business, as a problem that they have and as a problem that they need to solve for themselves. And at the point that they do that, to the extent that your product or service is a minimum viable service and affordable and accessible and meets a certain requirement, you're not selling, you're simply making them aware of something you've delivered, and they are buying. I mean, they are buying that capability. And in the past, I remember one portfolio company where for 2 years, we're like 10, 12% quarter to quarter over operating plan forecasts. I was like, wow, this is going great. Life is good. And then we had one quarter where we missed. And then we had another quarter where we missed. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on here? This was early in my career, I remember it well. And we weren't able to recover from that, actually. So it turned out we had an amazing sales team. And so the sales team for 2 years was literally
knocking it out.
I mean, everybody was buying it. But then the key question was, well, wait a minute. Let's talk about usage data. Well, show me the list of kind of projects that are being completed with this system. And they're like, well, we don't really have that data. Well, we don't really know. Well, it turned out that nobody was using it.
Yeah, they're buying it.
They were buying it, but they weren't using it. And you can only sell that to a certain number of early adopters, maybe the early fringes of early majority, but no one's buying it. And so at some point, you run out of runway in terms of the expense associated with selling the product. And so if it's genuine, you are actually selling into a market where where the market is buying your service to meet their needs. They're not buying the product to meet your business plan needs.
Yeah, that's very good. So let's reverse that and say, what was a company that you thought there's no way in hell that thing's going to be successful, and it turned out to be successful? Yep,
I remember it well. So I was sitting in the conference room, and articulate entrepreneur, articulate. I mean, he just kind of walks in, gives a demonstration, answers there's not even a lot of questions. I mean, they did a phenomenal job of presenting their business plan. And I thanked them very much, and we talked about following up afterwards. And they walked out of my room, and I remember sitting in that room saying, wow, I mean, I understand everything that they just described about their business from a business perspective, but I do not understand that value proposition at all. So you're telling me I'm going to walk out in the street, and when I need to figure out where I'm going to go eat, I'm going to take my cell phone and I'm going to shake it, right? And it's going to tell me what neighborhood, what cuisine, and what price point. And I can fix one of those.
No one will ever do that.
I was like, really? And then I sat there and I went home. I was like, honey, would you ever shake your phone to figure out where? You wouldn't either, would you? That's where I began to understand that famous slogan from the London Tube, mind the gap. Right? Mind the gap. It's not the train gap, it's the generational gap of understanding the shifts in terms of usage of technology and how important it is to understand what it means to be a digital native, really, as opposed to a digital adoptee into the ecosystem. But that whole notion of just not grokking it, and not because the business fundamentals, numbers, and everything else didn't make sense, because the value proposition itself didn't. And of course, they got got acquired. It wasn't 3 months later. They were acquired for like $75 million or something. Would have been an 8x investment, right?
Yeah,
it's one of
like
these
6
things,
months.
Like, exactly. So so that was one that I remember quite well.
And let's talk about some of the like, if someone's gonna pitch you as an investor, what are some of the, give me the worst 2 pitches you've heard?
Oh, gosh.
In the last, like, just say 5 years.
Understood. I mean, I think the absolute worst thing that can happen in a presentation is entrepreneurs that talk about how they're going to make their investors a lot of money. Those things happen as a result of an outcome, and that outcome is having built a great product that solves a big business need that people are paying for. I mean, we can do inauthentic things, but there's something really rewarding and refreshing about being a Texas armadillo straight down the middle of the 2 yellow lines down the road. And that is focusing on building a product that solves a real problem. And so this notion of, thank you for your time today, really glad you're here. Our business idea is going to return a 10x for you in 4, 5, 7 years' time. Now let me tell you what it's about. It's like, no, thank you. I appreciate you're looking out for my business model, but the way you do that is by telling me how you walked in here with a really innovative technology idea. And so that, for me personally, is it's just really grating. I mean, the idea here is that we're here in service of delivering real value to the marketplace, and so let's focus on those products. Let's focus on those opportunities. That's not to say that you won't find incredibly inflated values as a result of people being able to see the future.
Sure.
In places where others can't quite see yet. Right? It's like, nope, I can actually see how if I buy this now for $1 billion, even though you're only generating 10 million in revenue, I'm actually getting it cheap because I know what's going to happen going forward. That's a different scenario. But the whole notion of going in with that outcome in mind at the beginning, it doesn't show, it talks about a transaction. It doesn't talk about sustaining value. It doesn't talk about, really understanding the customer value proposition. And going back to that first column of extraordinary successes, every one of those companies were genuine. Every one of those CEOs and those management teams were just maniacally focused on the success of their customers. Yeah. And so for me personally, that's a deeply held value. And
what's the opposite? So give me some, like, the last 5 years, what's one of the 2 top ones you're like, holy, that was awesome. I'm buying whatever he sold me. I'm buying it. What were some of those? Give us some of those nuggets.
Yeah, and so the presentations that begin with a clear articulation of a problem, and actually, I've been there, I've seen it, this is the issue that I've seen. Your ability to then say, this is the characterization, these are the number of interviews and conversations I've had from different lenses to validate that problem statement, check. Next conversation, so given that problem, it would seem that the solution needs to be structured like this. And so this is a competitive landscape. Here are the foundational elements that are in place to deliver that product or service. Here are the requirements it would need to be. Here are the price points that it needs to fall into. Great. Now let's talk about the business and the product that I've built and how it addresses the relationship between that problem that we talked about and this answer that I've just presented to you. Yeah. And it's that marriage of problem and answer that I think is so hard and so interesting. Yeah. And so today, if we talk about innovation in corporations, I think one of the reasons why companies are buying so many smaller businesses is because of this unquenchable thirst for growth at the share price, but that's manifested by growth in terms of organic growth in the business. Yeah. And the truth of the matter is that it's just gotten harder and harder as the rate of innovation has excelled for larger companies to be able to compete. And for them to be able to compete, ironically, in figuring out what are the right questions to ask. Larger businesses are now doing a tremendous job of having closets full of answers, room full of intellectual property, reams of patent applications. They would kill for an interesting question. Yeah. For the opportunity to truly understand a new market opportunity that they hadn't seen before.
Yeah, that question.
And it's a question. And so, which is why, from my perspective, that balance of interesting questions and interesting answers, and it's that combination wrapped around an innovative business model that gives rise to the greatest innovation opportunities going forward. Yeah. And that applies to a whole ecosystem. So that can be $1 billion company, $100 million company, or $1 million company. Yeah. It's just that notion of understanding problem, understanding answer, and coupling those things together in an innovative way.
And what industry in the next 12 to 18 months, maybe even 24 months, what things are you interested in learning more about that you maybe don't, or maybe you know a fair amount, but you'd like to learn more? Give me a couple industries that interest Enrique.
Yep, for me, on a personal level, education technology is huge.
Yeah.
And so, we have innovated away from the blackboard and chalk. We now have digital whiteboards and pens. Yeah. But when we think about the process of learning and education, I think that there's just a fundamental opportunity there. So we spend more in the United States alone. We spend more on education than Social Security and defense combined.
Say it again?
We spend more on education in the United States than Social Security and defense combined.
So
right? And this is K through 12.
Why aren't we just the smartest?
So it's an interesting question. You go back and kind of double click on that and understand what's involved here. What are the issues? And so you spend time thinking about the purpose of education and how that really kind of pans out and its intent. We have a lot of work to undo related to some of the things that we did back at the time of the assembly line. And the idea that the purpose of education was to create workers to feed other people's businesses. And so now we have an opportunity to focus and say, well, what if each of us could think about the businesses that inspire us individually? How would we actually go about learning how to execute against realizing those dreams and those visions? Because each of us has different sensibilities and different backgrounds and different points of view about what's interesting and what's not. And all of them are valuable. And all of them are interesting, and we actually cheat ourselves collectively as a result of not giving all of us individually the opportunity to realize those visions and explore an opportunity to create a new business. And we can go to business school today and get an MBA, and that teaches us how to run a business. But where do you go when you want to learn how to build a business? And that's a combination of skills and understanding how to run that chief experiment officer experiment of one market at a time and that problem answer solution pair. But beyond that, deeper than that, it's really a process of knowledge. There's a couple of things, right? One of how do we go about acquiring knowledge? How do we go about not stifling this incredible creativity that we're born with? Where you can sit a 2-year-old with a stick in mud and they're happy for 3 days, right? And as we get older and older, that creative juice kind of starts to meld and starts to kind of go away. Well, how do we actually continue that incredible curiosity all the way through? How do we then arm that with a set of skills and resources that allow us to really exploit and leverage our passion, those things that get up at 3 in the morning because I can't sleep because I have this idea in my head and I know it would change the world, to be able to galvanize those resources to actually get them out in the marketplace? How do you tap into, in the days of artificial intelligence, it was called expert systems, of tapping into people or systems that could answer questions for you. Now mercifully we have video conferencing and systems of engagement that allow us to find the real expert instead of a cyber expert as an additional set of resources. All of those things combined, and then finally from an education perspective, is the knowledge that things can take time. And you can actually, one of the beauties of college and school is that you can imagine a project or an effort that isn't just about tomorrow, literally tomorrow or next week, but it's something that with investment of time and effort, in 2 years' time, you can actually accomplish something that's meaningful and interesting. All of those things together are a part of an education experience. And so when I think about education technology to be able to support the transfer of that type of pedagogy, more broadly based, very excited about what opportunities emerge as a result of really reinventing the notion of what education means.
What's another technology or industry that interests you?
Yeah, for me, it's energy, and specifically clean technology.
Clean.
Yeah, exactly right. So in May of this year, I was in Nicaragua and Honduras. I work with an organization here called Global Partnerships. Yeah. Here in earlier, a couple months ago, we had a visitor here who got her first light in April of this year. Right, I mean, so Edison, I think the first demo of the light bulb was December of 1869.
So it took them
150 years to get her first electric bulb, right? Yeah. And so she was, the kids couldn't do homework at night. Yeah. Right? I mean, you go there and a beautiful star site because there's no light pollution.
Sure.
I had 5 bars of coverage on my cell phone, but not a single light bulb to be found.
Sure.
Right? And so this whole notion of understanding the opportunities for kind of lighting the world and allowing people to get the advantage of lighting is just huge. And so you start at the level of lighting. Second, they run a 24/7 fire in their kitchen. Right? So it's wood.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's an open-ended. And so we have other technologies for wood and for cooking. We turn to water purification systems. And those are really pretty interesting opportunities as well. So that whole clean tech cycle of improving the quality of life for all of us is something that's just really powerful, because we have turned to kind of fossil fuels, if you will, in an incredible amount here in the developed world. And if the rest of the world defines middle class in the same way that we have with respect to the burning of fossil fuels, then we're in trouble, because we don't actually have enough for everyone to enjoy a middle class quality of life that's dependent on those resources. And so we have to find sustainable ways of being able to do that. And there are more cost-effective ways that are coming online all the time related to energy, to water, and to food production.
Yeah. Exactly. So, what are the the aspects when you're evaluating an investment, and let's just say there's you and two of your friends that are looking at the investment together. What's the one? I call it a tipping point. What's the one thing that will tip it over the edge of being first a non-investment and second an investment? Right? There's usually, you have one, I may have one, Joe has, what's yours? Yep. What's your tipping point for saying, yeah, or no way?
Yep, the people.
People.
The team. I mean, I think the team just makes a huge difference. If it is really about execution, execution is delivered by individuals. And so the notion of understanding the capacity, the capability, the insights, the resourcefulness, the integrity, the panache, the persuasiveness, all of those elements together to get, remember, 1 in 7 billion with an idea. And so do I believe you're the salmon that's going to end up red at Marble Mount, back after having done the trip? And all of those dynamics are associated with the people. And so the tipping point if the business is of equal value, and the market is of equal value, and the valuation is of equal value, all things being equal, the thing that will make the difference is the quality of the entrepreneur.
Yeah, and some of that is gut, right? Some of that is gut instinct of you just saying, he feels good when I shake his hand, right? Exactly. It's one of those things you can't necessarily subjectively say, check this off.
Yeah, no, it isn't. And one of the things we try to do, though, is understand, what are the dimensions of success as an entrepreneur. Self-awareness, it's just huge. And that's recognizing that, your ability to build a big business is a confluence of a variety of different factors. And it really does take a village and a whole bunch of resources, of capital, of time, of people to allow the company to realize its full potential. If you're looking to do this all yourself, right? Then no, that's not successful. If you're willing to recognize kind of the failure modes and learn from those failures, if you're constantly embracing resources that are brought before you, if you're a self-serve CEO that really recognizes resources that are there and aren't waiting for them to come to you, but you're looking for ways to capitalize on them in service of getting that idea out of your head, then those are the kinds of individuals that are just, that's what it takes in order, execution excellence, in order to be able to realize the full power of your vision. And so we try early on to identify who's got it, who doesn't, who has that entrepreneurial aptitude, is what we call it, to be able to persevere in the face of adversity.
Yeah, and what's the tipping point the other way?
The tipping point the other way is, you go to a meeting and they never use the word customer. Right?
I mean, that's interesting.
Right? If you're in a meeting and they never use the word, well, here's the market, here are the competitors, here's use of proceeds, and I'm waiting, I was like, wow, we're done. I mean, if we've gone through this entire meeting and you've never said the word customer, then we're misaligned from the inception, right? Because it goes back to authenticity.
You've probably not talked to them.
I'm sorry?
You've probably not talked to the customer.
Oh, right, exactly. Oh, it's absolutely the case. I mean, and so you've got to be talking about the customer. I mean, I think if you look at more, you just do.
Yeah, no, exactly. What has been your most fun investment? And I'm not saying financially, like, this was fun. What was that investment? Yeah,
I think for me personally, it was probably a 10x. So a 10x is a company that was built here by, actually incubated at Preston Gates & Ellis, the law firm. And it came about when Microsoft, the history is, Bill Newcomb is a general counsel at Microsoft, antitrust litigation against Microsoft. His law firm is Preston Gates & Ellis. He goes to Preston Gates and says, okay, folks, you're going to find a way of using technology to manage our costs in our defense against this claim. Preston Gates and Ellis goes off and says, we need to invent some technology to help us do that, and they did. And so they built some natural language processing software to help assist them in the process of electronic discovery. They have to read through all these emails, look through all these Word documents, and so they created actually fairly innovative technology to help them do that. Now, prior to that, what attorneys and paralegals did is they print documents, read all of them, tape them to walls, and use yarn. I mean, literally, yarn to stitch argument connections together. And so for me personally, the person that they tapped to help them with that idea was a gentleman by the name of Skip Walter, and Skip was the person that hired me, that actually brought me to Seattle. And so it's ironic that I was then kind of chairman of his board at the time when he had been my boss when I was at Aldous. So that was a great relationship. The way we got into the investment was believing that natural language processing was all of the data that's in an Excel spreadsheet and an Oracle database and an SQL database, that's well taken care of. But all the stuff that's in our Word documents and instant message streams and notes and that has no structure to it, that's where the real, that's the data that needs the most instrumentation. And so we had spent some time focused on understanding that market, and we decided that unstructured data was more valuable to focus on than structured data. And then second said, well, why would you want to use unstructured content? And we decided that it made more sense to look at businesses where that was based on making decisions versus supporting communication. And we went through that analysis and found 3 companies that fit that profile in 2000. One of those companies, all of them started with the letter A, and none of them needed money because they were all profitable. One of them was Autonomy, acquired by HP for $12 billion a couple years back. Well, the second one was a 10X. And a 10X was profitable from the inception. So it took me 4 years. I was in 2000, and I went to them 4 years in a row, and finally in 2004, they let me invest in their business because they had been and the reason they did is they were looking to move beyond electronic discovery to other market segments. So go-to-market strategy was an area that we could help them with, and that worked out well. So it was people that I'd known for a long time. Sure. It was in the cold, coming up with an investment thesis, identifying a segment and saying that's a space and those are the companies and being right. It was 4 years of work to get into the deal once we did, and that was really rewarding. And then, on top of that, ultimately they were acquired.
How long with the exit? How long was the exit?
It wasn't 4 years, probably 3 years. I mean, they were acquired by one of our service providers, like 98% gross margins. I mean, it's just an incredible,
stupid money.
It was fantastic, and the business model was just extraordinary. And so it was one of those things where it just touched on so many different aspects and elements of my professional and personal career that I just really enjoyed it.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Feel free, guys, if you have any questions, go ahead and raise your hand. I'll bring them up. But Vi?
Well, I just had a question. I missed what you said about why you chose those companies. It was something about decision versus use.
Oh, yeah. Communication support versus decision support. There's often times when you can imagine doing that analysis to understand. And essentially, well, this information is generally about this. And so it's a taxonomy, and you use it to describe it, but the purpose of that is a description for someone else. Our notion of decision support is that based on the structures that you identified, you are then going to make a decision about that information. In the case of the electronic space, the single question they were looking to answer is who knew what when? Right? And so you did this analysis to be able to understand who knew what when in preparation of argument structures. And so the point is that by doing unstructured analysis with a business intent, that is a greater value proposition in the context of discovery versus search than it is simply looking to see what you find, not knowing what you're going to find, and being opportunistic about it. And so it's this intentionality of being clear about the business problem you're trying to solve, and how much more powerful that is, even still, in my opinion, than it is, big data for services. Well, what can we discover? What can we discover? I think you have to at least still bind that within a set of business questions that you're trying to solve.
Good.
You talk about the fact that most of us are the R&D opportunities for these big corporations. How hostile will the big corporation be to us? Because we're going to start making inroads into their market as we're growing, okay? And there's going to be conflict there. Do these large companies, are they well managed enough to allow us to grow and then be civil about buying us out? Or is it on a case-by-case basis? I mean, if I were to try and sell my product to Pepsi, which I won't, but I mean, are they going to be open and friendly to an opportunity to be bought, to buy me out, or is this going to be nothing but?
Yeah, I think 2 points. One is it very much depends on the nature of the business and the industry. And the second point I would make is don't let it get in your way. Right? And so the truth of the matter is that 40% of the S&P 500 changes over every 10 years. Do they want to be on the 60% column or on the 40% column? To the extent that you are true and really understand the business that you're serving and the problem that you're solving, there will always be someone that's willing to help you get to the level that you need to. That's on that point. But to the other side, I think that historically we've had a fairly transactional nature and engagement model with the larger businesses. And I think what we need to come to understand is that those hierarchies of having worked for a corporation, and then it became a company, and now it's this kind of loose affiliation of unstructured, work from home, kind of more amorphous relationship with suppliers and vendors and employees. I think that structure is one that facilitates a different level of engagement with these companies in a way where you can actually gain greater access than you could before. And so not looking at it as a transaction where you never have a conversation. You build a business for 7 years, and now it's time to sell the business, and then you call them. It's like, that's actually, I never meant to sell a business. Every company that we exited through acquisition was bought. And the reason it was bought is because there was a long-standing relationship where it's like, hey, would you help us build this product? Yeah, absolutely, because if you do that well, that's going to be helpful to me. Terrific, thank you. I won't charge you, and if I do have to start charging you, one of my first 10 customers, I'll give you a great price discount. I could just use the value of your insight, your credibility for my business. Terrific, happy to do that. They do that for a while. I really like that product and relationship. Maybe we could think about doing another project over here. And that works. And at the end of the day, it's like, wait a minute. We are doing so much work together. I really need exclusive access to the things that you've built. We should have a conversation about your becoming a part of our business. FTI at a 10X, WPP at GMI, Microsoft with Quantiv. In every single instance, these are all relationships that had started on the business development side and warrant. Now it's time to sell, and now you pursue a transactional element. And so really starting early and having an eye towards, if it is an M&A path, who is it that's the most likely beneficiary of the work that I'm doing, and start those conversations early.
Anyone else? I've got some questions here. I got some questions that some of you have actually sent me, so go ahead.
I was going to ask one just related to that. How about, well, I'm going to actually use our example. I'm working for a startup that has a remote level. My concern, what I'm helping them with is, I can't see how we could financially support the whole marketing thing. Mm-hmm. So that's something I've been trying to figure out is when do we approach other level companies, construction levels, because if I can partner with one of those that they're essentially doing the marketing, because I don't think I can really prove how strong our thing is until we get it out in construction. So that was something I struggled with.
Yeah, I think that there's two parts to that. One is trying to find ways of proving out the value proposition exchange is in your best interest to really go complete and be able to get the beneficiaries to be the reference accounts and the spokespeople for the value that they're extracting out of the business. Because it's at that point that then you can take that story and go to a corporate partner who can leverage their I have a strong bias about strategic partners. And my strong bias is that I believe that they are best, their most valuable resource to a company is distribution. Right. Ahead of that, I think it's hard to get balanced value from strategic partners. I think they have their interests, you have yours, and those don't align as well, and they're bigger than you, and so sometimes you get out of alignment. But at the point that you've proven the value proposition, and you have a distribution channel that, or you have a product that can go through their distribution channel, then you're in a far better position, and that's where co-op dollars and marketing dollars and other partnership opportunities really come into spade. A second path is, instead of tying them in late, is link them in early so that they actually are, in a restricted way, a part of a co-development arrangement. It's not a strategic investment, right? So they're not on the cap table, but it is a partnership that allows their insight to leverage and inform your development at the earlier stage. And depending on the strategic nature of your innovation, there will, if it's very strategic, then there'll be multiple partners that are willing to do that. And I've done that successfully. And they just have a tremendous sense of ownership associated with the business. And so sometimes those work out, fairly well. But those are the two endpoints, either really early on co-development or really late when you're looking for distribution. But then you have to have the proof points on the value proposition being real for your business as well as theirs.
Great, that helps a lot.
Yeah.
So ask maybe a bit of an odd question. So if you had to start a business and it was Enrique's business and you had to start it, say next month, what would the business be?
Wow.
Now it can't be one of your,
Understood.
right? It's not one of your other companies, it's your business. So it's something that you want to do for say 5 to 10 years. It's something you're passionate about.
Yes.
What would that business be?
One of the things that's interested me goes back to unstructured content, the role of video. So I've done some video products at Adobe and elsewhere, and just seeing the power of visual communications. And that relationship between kind of broad author and audience is kind of an interesting dynamic. And so I'd be pretty interested in actually understanding the power of the existing corpus of video content that's out there. And then I'm also married to a librarian. Right? And so I think a lot about the notion of, imagine if our search engines were actually curated by librarians instead of curated by crowdsourcing. Right? Which is an interesting dynamic. And so if you apply that notion to video content, because it's really hard to find the video content that's actually subservient to the integrity rules of the library science field, the whole notion of a YouTube guide created by librarians with a taxonomy of the library catalog to help you find the video that you need in an advertising-free context, that could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, so what's in the video?
The videos are the things that exist. Actually, it's just a directory. So it's actually just meta. And so I am getting ready to change the battery in Tesla.
Sure.
How do you do that?
How do you do that?
How do you do that? And I don't want, I know Tesla's going to send me to go buy this battery and that, but no. I want to actually, in an objective, right, so it's not tied to a specific advertising or business model. It's actually tied to information sources. Right? And so that whole notion of understanding the organization and cataloging of video content at scale we don't really have that today. So that's something that'd be interesting for me to do.
That's great. That's very interesting for you just to hear the thought process behind that. So let's go back to some of the companies you've worked with and some of the stories that would help others maybe not make the same mistake. Give us a company that made a big pivot that actually made it, that you thought, wow, this is gonna be ugly. But they pivoted and actually made the correct pivot. Give us an example of that and tell us kind of what that pivot was.
Yeah, so there's a company that was in the embedded system space. And so fault-tolerant software. Fault-tolerant software means you have software that if a machine is going to crash, the software automatically reboots the machine so it's got zero downtime. And initially we were focused in the area of telecommunications. So back in the days of 5 ESS servers and the early days of wireless switches, they provided software into that market. But right at the dot-com bust, wireless died. And so their entire business model really took an amazing amount of injury at the time because the market went away. It wasn't the value proposition, it was the market that was done. And so one of the things that we needed to do was figure out what other markets have the same requirement of high availability for their systems. And we found 2 markets that had that. One of them was in the media space, and the other was in the defense space. And so we decided to go after defense. And defense was brutal because essentially you have a long lead time effort. It's a huge lead time. But we had just enough revenue to allow us to stay in the telecom space that we were successful in penetrating the defense space. And so today, 100% of US fighters fly with our software.
Really?
Right. And so it was this notion of beginning to think about, all right, we have to make a pivot, how do you do it? It took us forever, but it's one of the long, our partner is Lockheed in that effort, and it's one of the longest standing military contracts, and little tiny company that had fewer than 50 people won Software Company of the Year by Lockheed 3 years in a row. So it spoke to the quality of the software and the system, but we needed to pivot really quickly. And once we had, then telecom came back as a result of feature phones to smartphones. So we did well on, we held our breath underwater long enough, got back to telecom, earned the defense market, and that allowed us to then go into the media market. And the media market was now video streaming over high performance networks. And once again, you just don't want your, you want it continuous and smooth, and our software actually can affect that. And so we were able to go into a third market. And ultimately, when we put those pieces together, all on the same technical foundation, we were able to prove to the markets, like, look, we've really got the best high availability software out there. And once we did that, we changed our business model to provide an open source version of it, and it wasn't 30 days later that the company was acquired.
Yeah, it was over. Yeah. Any questions?
If I ask another question, when I'm soliciting the accredited investor, this is an individual who's got a net worth of, let's say, $50 million or $100 million, and I'm asking that individual to invest $50,000 in my small startup. And my question to you is I understand one of their motivations is the gamble. They want the 10 times return. What are the other factors that would motivate an investor like that to spend $50,000 on me? Because frankly, that's just crumbs off their table. Why would they get involved in my small business when they can spend all their time investing in IBM, et cetera, et cetera?
I think this is where we go back to kind of the fact that we're people. And I think that this is where you really kind of tap into a human dimension as the real driver. Because to your point, it's not about financial return at that point. It's about a different dimension. It's about a couple of things. One is you reach a chord with something that they care deeply about. And so they're committed to seeing a change happen in whatever industry sector, and whether it's 50,000 or 5 million, they would do it anyway because they're just completely focused on making an impact on that sector. And so when you can find that level of strategic alignment, that's a wonderful thing because that's really fairly powerful. A second one is tied to reputation value for that individual and their opportunity to be able to celebrate and laud their investment activity, their investment portfolio. And really, you become one of their investee children that they can talk fondly of and broadly about amongst their peers. Incredible value to them that comes from being able to do that. The financial piece, that pales in comparison at the level of wealth that you were describing. Most of the appeals that we make at that level are not about the financials. They speak to aspirational, strategic, or other catalytic investment purposes, but they speak less to financial return. Having said that, they still have to be sensible financially, but they need to be actually subscribing and appealing to a different dimension for each of the individuals.
Well, I want to say this is a great chat. I absolutely loved it up here. I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure. Yes. My pleasure. Thank you.
I failed one. I forgot to thank one person who's very important. Founders Raw, who's shooting the video, Josh here. Thank you for being here and doing this. The Founders Raw is a great, Nick Hughes, I don't know if some of you may know him, but he's doing a great job with Nick Founders Raw, and they're doing some really interesting stuff with the videos. So thanks again.